Going to revise all the stages before reaching to birth. So as we know, to make a new baby we need male and female gametes, which are sperm and ovum. So sperm produced in the testis and ovum developed in the ovary, then released into the oviduct by ovulation process. After that, during sexual intercourse or copulation and after ejaculation, the sperms reach into the uterus. Then most of them die because of the conditions. And the other sperms reach into the ovum. In this case, one sperm passes through ovum's membrane. After that, sperm nucleus and ovum nucleus fuse as fertilization to form a zygote. About 6 days after fertilization, the ball of cells now called an embryo. Now, the development of a new individual takes place when implantation is complete. Now the baby is growing and developing until reaching into the birth stage. So here we have testis which produce sperm, and here we have the ovary which released ovum, and this is the oviduct. When the ovum released from ovary, we call this a process ovulation. So sperm come from the testis and from the male reproductive system to the oviduct. Here the nucleus of sperm and the nucleus of ovum fertilize. Then the zygote is formed here. Then the zygote moves to implant in the uterus lining to form an embryo. So if you look at this picture, you will find that the head of the baby against the cervix. After 9 months, and as the birth approaches, the head of the baby will be against the cervix. The head of the baby will be against the cervix. Now, after 9 months, and as birth approaches, there will be many events leading to birth. So, in this lesson, we are going to describe the events leading to birth and describe the early care of a young baby, and we are going to appreciate the benefits of breastfeeding feeding. So, as we said before, there is a sequence of events that leads to birth. So, the scientific name of the sequence of events that leads to birth is labor. Okay, the first stage in labor, actually, it's the contractions of the uterus muscle. So, when the contractions of uterus muscle start, so we are in labor stage. So, if you look here in your book, so please open your book, page 186. Here we have labor. So what do you mean by labor? The sequence of events that leads to birth of a baby. And the first stage, as we said, the contractions of the uterus muscle. So labor begins when the contractions of the uterus muscle start. Okay. Now, actually, those contractions affected by main 3 hormones, which are progesterone, oxytocin, and estrogen. So let's study the properties and what will happen to the concentration of each hormone. So let's start with the first hormone. The first hormone, progesterone. The first hormone is progesterone, which prevents the contractions of the uterus muscle. So the level of progesterone falls as birth approaches. So if you look here at the progesterone, it increases during the birth, increasing during the pregnancy, but at the end of the pregnancy time and as the birth approaches, the concentration or the level of progesterone falls. So this is the first hormone. The second hormone is oxytocin. This hormone actually it stimulates the contractions, and the source of this hormone is the pituitary gland of the mother. So as birth approaches, the pituitary gland releases oxytocin to stimulate the contractions of the uterus. This is the oxytocin. As the birth approaches, the pituitary gland in the mother releases oxytocin to stimulate the contractions of the uterus muscle. The last hormone which helps the contractions indirectly by making the uterus more sensitive to oxytocin is estrogen. Actually, estrogen helps the contractions indirectly. How it helps it? By making the uterus more sensitive to oxytocin. Now, as we said, by the end of the pregnancy, the baby normally lies with its head against the cervix. As we saw in this picture, as the birth approaches and by the end of the pregnancy, the baby normally lies with its head against the cervix. Okay? At first, the pregnancy woman feels in contractions every 20 minutes, then every 10 minutes, then every 5 minutes, and so on. But as birth approaches, the contractions become more powerful and more frequent. Now, the question is, how do contractions affect the amniotic membrane and cervix? How do contractions affect the amniotic membrane and cervix? So before answering this question, let's watch this video. Focus with the video to answer the question, please.
During a vaginal childbirth, the first stage of labor lasts about 12 to 19 hours and starts when your baby settles lower into your pelvis. In response, your cervix begins to efface or become thinner and dilate or widen. During this time, you may feel strong, regular contractions occurring every 5 to 20 minutes and lower back pain and cramping that doesn't go away. You may see a brownish or reddish mucus discharge, which could be the mucus plug at the opening of your cervix falling out. Your water may break, which can either be a large gush of fluid or a continuous trickle. If you experience any of these symptoms, contact your doctor or midwife to see if you should go to the hospital. At the beginning of stage 2 of labor, which can last from a few minutes to 3 hours, your cervix is fully dilated to 10 centimeters. And your baby's head has moved beyond the cervical opening into your birth canal. During this stage, you will begin to push your baby out. You may instinctively push when you feel the urge, or you may need coaching from your doctor, midwife, or labor nurse as to when to push and when to rest. In a normal delivery, your baby's head will rotate to face your back. During active labor, your uterus is divided into an active segment that contracts, pushing the baby downward, and a flexible passive segment that remains relaxed, stretching to provide more room for the baby to pass through. To help the shoulders pass through the birth canal. Your baby's shoulders are delivered one after the other in order to fit through your pelvis. Once the shoulders emerge, the rest of your baby slides out easily. After your baby is born, his or her umbilical cord will be cut. In stage 3 of labor, which may last 5 to 30 minutes, mild contractions will help push the placenta out of the uterus.
Okay, so
during a vaginal childbirth, the first stage of labor lasts about 12.
So, when you hear anybody say breaking the waters, direct you have to know that the amniotic membrane was broken and the amniotic fluid was released. So the question was, how do contractions affect the amniotic membrane and cervix? As you saw in the video, the contractions cause the amniotic membrane to break and release the amniotic fluid. So this is known as breaking the waters. What about cervix? Actually, contractions, the cervix affect by making the cervix to dilate. Dilate means get wider. So when you hear anybody say breaking the waters, direct you know that the amniotic fluid, the amniotic membrane was broken and the amniotic fluid was released. So, as you saw in the video, the first stage of labor is complete when the cervix is wide enough for the baby's head to pass through. Labor continues as the baby's head is pushed past the birth canal. The birth canal here is the cervix and the vagina. So the cervix get wider and also already the vagina is wide. So both are the birth canal. From now on, the process is quite rapid and needs only gentle contractions by the mother and also by the obstetrician. Obstetrician means the doctor who specializes in birth. The birth process is quite traumatic for the baby and it may become short of oxygen as the umbilical cord is compressed. So here actually this stage is dangerous for the baby because it may become short of oxygen as the umbilical cord is compressed by the walls of the birth canal. Here the baby also, one of the cures that the doctor made, the baby's heartbeat is monitored during birth and the blood soon reoxygenates once the baby begins to breathe. When the baby is breathing properly, the umbilical cord is clamped to prevent bleeding. So here it's important to clamp the umbilical cord before cutting to prevent bleeding. After clamping it, the doctor will cut it. Now after birth, the placenta comes away from the wall of the uterus and leaves the vagina. So we started before birth and during birth and now after birth. After cutting the umbilical cord, the placenta comes away from the wall of the uterus and leaves the vagina. Okay. Now, as you know, that the newborn baby has reflex called suckling reflex. What do we mean by suckling reflex? So when a newborn baby is placed close to its mother's breast, it sucks as the nipple. So this is the suckling reflex. So actually suckling is very useful for the mother because it stimulates the mother's brain to release more oxytocin. And here oxytocin has another function which causes tiny muscles in the mammary glands to squeeze out milk. So this process is called lactation. So oxytocin here has another function which is causing tiny muscles in the mammary glands to squeeze out milk. So lactation means the secretion of milk by the mammary gland. Okay, so let's start with bottle feeding. Sorry, before bottle feeding, we have something. I missed something here. Back to the mother's feeding. You know that the best food for the baby is the mother's milk because it contains all the nutrients that baby needs in the correct proportions. And the name of the milk which made in the first few days is colostrum, which contains mainly antibodies and very little food. So here, the best food for the baby is the mother's milk because it contains all the nutrients the baby needs in the correct proportions. So what do we call the name of the milk which made in the first few days? Actually, it's the colostrum. Now, the last thing before starting with bottle feeding, at around 4 to 6 months, when the first teeth are starting to appear to the baby can begin to eat some solid food. So the gradual change over from milk to a solid food diet, we called it weaning. So weaning means